This is the most important video I have ever made. We're going to talk about what it's like to be a person of color going to a historically white institution, theater school, and how to survive it. And as always, I can only speak from my experience as a Mexican and American woman going through the University of Michigan, so I am joined by three incredible artists and friends, Talia Thiesfield, Chris Campbell, and Jess Gomes-Ng, in order to come up with some tips and practical advice that we want to give you so that you can, take this on your educational journey and hopefully leave your university better than you found it. Also, here's the thing. Fixing racism in a huge institution is not your job. It's not. However, to get the best training that you can, I do think that there are some very actionable things that, those of us that have already gone through this can help you out with. And I want to say, yes, this video is very much for our POC performer friends. But if you are a white ally, I implore you to also keep watching and learn how to support your buddies while they're going through this, okay? How's it going?
Hi, Aline. I'm good. How are you?
So good. So good. Good to see you. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is what is this tokenization thing that happens?
So I think at university, something that can sometimes happen with especially white professors who don't have that much experience with that many people of color, or who aren't people of color, obviously, is that they can look to their previous students of color who they've guided, or people that they've worked with who are also of the same race as you, and try to fit you in the same path that those people followed. And I think it's always very well intentioned, and sometimes it's helpful. It's good to work on material that's related to your race, but I think it can also make you feel like you're just there to fill a track or to satisfy a type, and it can feel very limiting, or kind of like you're almost a commodity as opposed to an artist with nuance and complexity.
So I want to bring on my friend Chris Campbell. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
So, Chris, what has been your experience with tokenization?
So I think in school, a moment where I was tokenized was I'm black, I'm gay, therefore kinky boots. For the longest time, Billy Porter was the blueprint. He was the only out and black, famous actor that we had to look up to, and so it was, everyone's following his, his career, and it's oh, kinky boots, so therefore it must be right for you, and it's simply not right for me. As much as I'd love it to be, and I think as much as my professors wanted it to be, it's not. So I found that to be quite frustrating and limiting, and it ended up discouraging me and making me feel well, if I can't do this, what am I going to do?
So now I'm going to welcome my friend Talia. We met doing Into the Woods, and I want to start off talking about tokenization.
I think I have a bit of a unique experience, just because the tokenization that I experienced had a lot to do with the fact that folks didn't know what to do with me. I had some professors who wanted me to shuck and jive, who wanted me to play up my blackness. In some cases, when they decided I was Latina enough for the day, they would want me to play up my Latinidad in whatever way, that meant for them. Not for me, for them. And that could range from belting and sprouting and being spicy and sassy. But then I think there were also times where they discredited my blackness or my Latinidad. And oftentimes I was told, you wouldn't understand this because you're not African American. And I'm Haitian, so I'm West Indian, I'm black. I am part of the African diaspora. I was tokenized in a way that we have you here as an other, but you're not really that. And they would try to define it for me as if I didn't know my own culture, or they would try to help me shape it in a way that fit their perception of how it should be.
So if you're someone that is feeling like you are being tokenized with the material that a professor is handing you, what would be a good way to ask for different material?
I think a good place to start is knowing why you want to do certain material and what you are seeking to gain from that. So an example from my experience was I was like, okay, I really want to drop in and start working on my voice, and I really want to challenge myself vocally. So I said, I thought, you know what, let's go for the bench scene, actually with Jess, my fellow classmate. So yeah, we wanted to do it together, and I was like, I really want to try this. It's going to be really difficult, acting and vocal wise, but especially vocally, and I really want to, lean into that. And so I think that's a good place to start, is knowing why you want to do certain pieces, and really like standing your ground and not backing down, and saying, yes, it might not be what you're going to see on a stage on Broadway or wherever, but I think it's worthwhile for my education to get these opportunities and to have this experience.
How to deal with microaggressions. A microaggression is something that a person does unknowingly that may be kind of based in a thought that is, misogynistic or racist, and they might not even understand that the context behind what they're saying is that, but obviously as the receiver, you're like, ugh, and it just feels a little prickly. So how would you deal with that in a class without making a whole scene? Because we're always so uncomfortable with that.
Right. Well, the first thing I would definitely say is that I think you have to address it. There is this whole idea of cancel culture now, where people will just go to social media and start writing about their experiences. But if there is one thing that I would say, is that you have to bring it up, because obviously, like you said, microaggressions are unintentional. And so your professor or your classmate literally has no idea, or maybe just a tiny inkling below their subconscious that they've said something offensive. And so I think it is, unfortunately, it shouldn't be, but it has to be partially your responsibility to make sure that they know that they shouldn't be saying that and why that's offensive to you. So I personally would try not to approach the conversation from a place of aggression, even if I might feel defensive or aggressive, because that person unintentionally, unknowingly, like you said, committed a microaggression and probably will respond very defensively and might even try and deny that they did something wrong if you're aggressive towards them. So I think it's much more important to try and converse with them. I would personally ask questions and try to get them to the root of why they said what they said. Why did they direct you to do that? Did they actually do it because they believe you're missing that quality, or did they just say that because that's how they stereotype you? And I think when you can ask those questions, even if they don't admit the real reason, to help them to see why for you that was offensive and why that could be perceived as a microaggression, I think is really important. So
they didn't even think about it before they said it.
Right.
And then once they're like, oh yeah, it is weird that I keep calling you by the name of the other student that
right, yes.
happens to be your same race. Why do I keep doing that? And I don't do that with the 17 blonde girls.
Right.
Why does that happen? There are some times that professors who are very cautious around the subject of race because they don't know how to talk about it, then end up kind of not teaching, with being told not actual no's, just stop doing that thing. So how did you handle that when you felt like you weren't given actual instruction?
So I definitely have had experiences where either professors or directors, guest directors, have avoided addressing my cultural identity, whether it was my Latinidad or my Blackness, by not just saying what it is that needed to be adjusted. If it was a regionalism in my voice, or the way that I carried myself, and anything that to them they perceived as indicative of my culture, it would turn into this kind of feeble attempt to give me a note, don't do that thing, that thing you do with your voice, or that thing that way, the way that you stand with don't do that. Instead of just addressing due to your regionalisms, or perhaps be from your background, you do this vocally and we can adjust it by doing this. I think they also, on the flip side, use a person's culture as a way of trying to give direction in inappropriate ways. And we've all heard it. Just black it up a little bit more, make it more urban, make it spicy. And it's that's the flip side of things, where in an effort to not get to the real point, they use words and phrases that are easy, and sometimes easy is not appropriate.
And another thing, for my wonderful white allies, a lot of the time when you're a victim of a microaggression, you are dealing with so many emotional, confusing, little shock, cringe, awkward things where you're like, ugh, I don't know if that's like fully weird, do I want to make a scene? So, if you are just a bystander in this encounter and you want to say, hey, I know my friend, I recognize she's uncomfortable, let me take this one on for her, God, that is just the greatest fucking gift you can give someone. And what that might look like is after class, maybe coming up to your friend and saying, hey, I noticed that this teacher said something that was a little weird and it didn't really resonate well with me. Did you feel okay about it? Do you want me to say something? Do you want me to just go with you while you say something? Or would you rather me just, give you a hug and let it slide? Something like that.
Especially if you consider yourself to be a white ally, which I hope that you do, and you're in a classroom setting and say like you have feedback to give your classmate who happens to be of color, or you have a question that you want to ask your friend who is a person of color, or you have a joke that you want to make and you feel that it could potentially ruffle some feathers, even if you don't think it's offensive at all, or if even there's like a slight moment of hesitation where you're like, oh, like maybe that's not right, then I would advise you to just not say it. Like, don't give that direction, don't give that feedback, don't make that joke. Personally, what I would do is speak to my friends about it. If you have friends of color and someone who you're close to, I think you can try and run it by them even and be like, is this offensive? Like, I really don't know, but I think it is your responsibility to bite your tongue and to not say something that could potentially cause both you and that person to be in kind of a very uncomfortable situation, because it probably wouldn't be that helpful in the end anyway.
So another really important thing, I think, is to have someone in your college setting that is a mentor. And sadly, the way that it is right now, the faculties of most programs are not very diverse. And a lot of us come into these programs without finding someone that like gets us as us, even if we may have some incredible relationships with some professors. So, Jess, did you feel like you could find someone that you clicked with, and what did you do about that?
Yeah, I have a few people that I feel like I spoke to when I was in college. I mean, like we've talked about, I just feel like the Asian experience in theater is very, very limited. And so, I wasn't expecting to have a faculty member who was Asian anyway. But whenever I met anybody who was Asian, like I met Stafford Arima and I asked him so many questions that I had. And most of them didn't even have concrete answers, but just things about like what's appropriate for me to audition for. Like, is it bad that I have bad feelings about auditioning for these shows? Questions like that unfortunately your Caucasian professors like wouldn't have the answers to, because they just don't have the understanding of the nuance that goes into those discussions. I think it's really important to have somebody that you can speak to. I remember when I was auditioning for shows my junior year, I started to get really insecure, I think, about my race, and my roommate, her senior buddy was an Asian performer, and so she put me in touch with her senior buddy, and I was able to speak to her on FaceTime about like feeling uncomfortable about going in for certain roles or feeling like I wasn't appropriate for certain things. And I also think like if you don't know anyone or don't know any alumni or don't have any connections, like find people who you look up to and be persistent about getting in touch with them, and ways to get in touch with them and be annoying. Like be persistent until you get a hold of who you want to get a hold of and ask them the questions that you want to ask them. And I think like from my perspective, like if anyone ever reached out to me and asked me questions like about race or asked me questions about my experience because they needed help, like I personally would be honored like to help them, you know what I mean? And like share my experience and hopefully help them through something that can be really isolating. So I think don't be afraid to try and get in touch with those people, and don't be afraid to seek out the voices that you want to hear from.
So what you can do is ask to be put in contact with an alumni that has gone through the program, or just reach out to people on the internet, because Jesus Christ, we love talking about our lives. Like any little Mexican girls that want to talk to me, please, dear God, DM me. Like I will talk to you. I love you.
When I was an undergrad, I went to University of Connecticut, and the head of our department and my mentor was Eric Hill. I say his name proudly. You can publish that, post it, print it. Eric Hill really kicked my ass. And I think the basis of my relationship with him was that it was always about the work. He didn't care where I came from, how I was talking. He was like, what are you bringing? Whatever it is that you have, what are you bringing? And he took what I gave and he worked with it, and I really appreciated that.
So this is kind of a tricky, very theater specific thing that happens, that because of the way the canon has been written, there is obviously an abundance of stories that are for white people, and there is actually a surprising amount of stories that have Black people as a specific component. Not a lot of them were actually written by Black people, which is like a whole other issue. However, when you just like look at the reports that Equity puts out every year, there's really a huge lack of Asian stories, of Latinx stories, and like anyone that doesn't identify as white or Black. So there is kind of this weird valley that I think both you and I have felt, Jess,
Yes.
of being like, where do I fit in when the show that we're doing this year is Hairspray?
Right.
And just kind of how weirdly isolating that can be.
Exactly what you're saying. I mean, I just think, especially I work in the UK, and I think here diversity and bold casting is also very Black and white, and I think it's weird to occupy the area where people don't think you're of color enough to be of color sometimes. And also because there are vast swaths of musical theater shows that are written specifically about racial segregation and about the Black struggle or about the white experience, you know, I think it can be very difficult to feel like you have shows where you actually belong, where you aren't like an extreme version of your race or it's very stereotyped into being, I don't know, for me personally, like an Asian princess, you know, who ends up killing herself because my lover dies. Like, I just think it can be very difficult to feel like you have a more nuanced place where you belong in theater that is more human and not based off of like someone's idea of what you are, what you should be.
Yeah, but I mean, it's funny because I feel like it's kind of this weird self-perpetuating thing where now, even in the real world, when, I don't know what it's like over in the UK, but like, for example, going in for a production of Next to Normal, where they're being extremely like all ethnicities, like all races, and you know, you look at the hallway and the audition and you're like, wow, we got a rainbow coalition going, like everyone is here. And then you start seeing maybe at the callbacks like, oh, wait a minute, this is a story about a family. Are they going to go genetically accurate children? Which is why I think it's so important to say, like, when color conscious casting is actually being very specific about like opening the doors to all the people that maybe don't have that much of a place in musical theater, even though in real life we carry a lot of privileges, being, you know, me, Latinx, with my like, I guess, white-ish passing thing, and obviously like the whole model minority thing, which is like a whole issue to unpack. But in our industry itself, it is like very, very few opportunities. Yeah. What's up with casting? In a university environment where you have to cast shows with like the 80 people that you have available, a lot of the time casting gets a little tricky. And I think for people that kind of don't live in the very, you know, clear-cut perceived categories, you can kind of exist in this weird in-between world, where a lot of the time casting is offered to you that is like actually a little bit inappropriate, and it just kind of lands on you to say, hey, as an artist, I should not be playing this role.
Unfortunately, I was in grad school long before these conversations about colorism and representation were really being discussed. But I was offered the opportunity to play a role. The role was Venus, in the Venus Hottentot in Susan Laurie Park's Venus. And as a light-skinned, mixed Afro-Latina woman, that was not appropriate to me. And I think I would still do the same thing that I did. I think I had enough of a sense of self that I told them that I thought it was inappropriate and I did not accept the offer. My advice to anyone, especially now in these times when we are talking about it, absolutely, there's no excuse, there's no reason why you should feel unsafe or uncomfortable simply saying, I can't do that. You know, it's as simple as that. I do not think I represent this role or this culture or what have you. I do not think I represent this appropriately, and I don't think it would be a wise choice to cast me in this. And I mean, that can be the end of the conversation.
I would love to ask you what your experience has been between casting in the college world to casting in the real world now that you're like out and about as a professional.
I feel like my time leading up to graduation, I was really thinking about my career going one way, and that being mostly Black shows and contemporary work and pop rock stuff, but always having this passion and joy for the golden age, and that's really where I started. And then I graduated, and here we are. And then the first big job I booked was Will Parker in Oklahoma, and it's such a silly story because the season for that theater it started with Oklahoma, then it was The Wiz, and then I think Beauty and the Beast and some other shows. And so they were auditioning The Wiz and Oklahoma right at the same time. And I remember getting off the elevator, I believe it was Pearl. I walked down the hallway and it was like, auditions for this theater. And it was, Oklahoma was this way and The Wiz was that way. And I remember I walked in and there was a group of, I think, the male dance call for The Wiz. And it was all of these Black boys. And I was like, oh. And then it was like, wait, I'm not here to do The Wiz. And it was this moment of, wow, like, you really never know where you're going to find yourself, and it's truly just, it's only like hindering yourself when you limit yourself and put these preconceived notions on the industry and yourself and the jobs you think you'll have. And so here I am, there's The Wiz, and I'm like, no, I'm actually going to Oklahoma, which was still a diverse room, but not an all Black show, and it wasn't a traditionally cast show. But the gag is, while I was there doing Oklahoma, there was an opening that opened up in The Wiz, and I ended up doing both shows, which I think is an important lesson, to always be versatile and do good work when you're there, because you never know when something's going to pop up and you need to be ready, and you're going to fit the bill, and you're going to be right for it, and they're going to need you.
If you're discounting yourself for a role that you know you could pull off simply based on race, I would encourage you to be actually very proactive. If you're feeling brave, go talk to the professor, the director, and say, hey, I'm going to do my best at this role that I know I could do, and I know would be a really good learning experience for me. I know that you're going to, cast how you cast. However, I just want you to be acutely aware that I don't want the decision to be made based on race. And that's it. And I think sometimes even just planting that little seed in their mind goes a surprisingly long way and will make you feel like you advocated for yourself, and I think psychologically be better in the long run to just kind of get that muscle memory in of expressing that these things are real and to not shy away from talking about them. Competition. Because of the tokenization that happens, sometimes it feels like if there are other people in your program that like check all the same boxes as you, it can get really easy to start seeing them as competition. To see, okay, if there's only 2 Latinx girls in this department, then we're always going to be pitted against each other. And it is so important to not internalize that, because there is absolutely no world where you are the same.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? That like, the root of this really is the tokenization, right? Because take, for example, the idea that all Black women riff. I know so many Black women who that is not their ministry. Like, they are legit Audra McDonald-ass singers, but they somehow end up in these waiting rooms, auditioning for roles that are skrelting and belting with all of the other Black women in the industry. And they're kind of like, how did I get here? And it's the tokenization that got them there, but then consequentially causes the animosity in the community, because they're constantly being pitted against these women who, quite frankly, they're not even the same type. But the folks on the other side of the table think that all Black people are the same.
And it's so important to just say, I'm gonna get to college, and whoever they try to like pit me against, I'm gonna go out of my way to make them my best friend and to get to know what makes them human.
Absolutely.
So that you can see that they're a person, and to not let yourself see them as checked boxes the way that the rest of the world is going to try to see you. So a lot of this is very choose your own adventure, which I think is the coolest part about Michigan, is that because it's a huge university, everything about your college experience, even if it's within the musical theater program, can be extremely customizable.